Hey, Jeff.
Hey, what's going on, man? How are you?
How's it going?
Going pretty well. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Great.
Well,
yeah, thanks.
You got a decent
Again, I
number.
apologize. I do. Yeah, I kept it. I'm not giving that up. Are you crazy? I'm going to have that forever.
That's kind of awesome. Sounds like you're a bit of an early riser like myself.
Well, I don't have a reason to be. I don't have children like you. I'm trying to. That's nice of you to say. It's actually not true, but I'm trying to change it. Is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Trying to make the most of your days. I imagine you've got a lot to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just joined a gym, so I don't want to become a cliche of, the cliche of joining a gym and then not going to said gym and feeling bad about myself because I'm wasting money and so I'm trying to figure if the more hours of the day of which I'm awake, that's more time that I can spend at the gym and spend doing what I need to do. But yeah, typically I'm not a super early riser, but typically in the 8 o'clock hour is when I get up.
Well, an aging rock star has to keep in shape. You got to be ready for the road.
Tell me about it, man. Tell me about it. I know it's a
You tell us
balance.
about it. You said you just got back from a tour.
Yeah, so I did a very quick solo European tour, and then I recorded some new songs in Belgium, and then my wife and I had a nice vacation in Paris and London, and then we came home to the East Coast for the holidays, and now we're back in LA and back to work.
So when you're playing solo around Europe, where are you playing, what kind of places, and what kind of material are you doing?
Yeah, typically it's in Germany, and that's where I've done the best over the years, and a little bit in France and Belgium and the Netherlands and Italy. I've been to the UK a few times as well. And the venues really run the gamut of anything, from festivals to venues to bars to living rooms. It's everything in between. Divided Heaven began as a solo project. So I have my first record was completely a solo record, and then the second record grew into a full band thing, and then a few EPs that were even more full band, and then this new record is kind of delightfully a blend of everything. So I play everything. I play songs from all of my releases, and everything that I've written that has turned out to be a full band song can be translated into a solo acoustic song.
And do you have access to all of that material? I mean, is it okay with all of the different bands that you've been in to play material from those bands? Because I know that can be a sticky situation sometimes.
I'm sure it would be okay, and I've really only done it, to be honest with you, I think I've only done it 3 times. You are correct in that I've been in a lot of bands, but the caveat to that is that a lot of those bands I joined, dare I say, past their prime, or at least when they had recorded and released a lot of material, and then when I joined the band, they were kind of in the twilight of what they were doing. But truth be told, I have no interest in playing, a VPR song on acoustic guitar, or a Boyle song on acoustic guitar, or even a Protagonist song on an acoustic guitar. Having said that, I have done it on occasion, literally 3 times, I think.
Why don't we go back, though, since we're talking about all these bands, and find out, sort of how you started on this path. You're one of a few guests that's not originally from Northern Virginia or the DC area, right?
Correct. Yeah, I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
The land of the Amish.
Exactly. And my sister, I have one older sister who's exactly 4 years older than me. And so her 4 years of college, or 4.5, were my 4 years of high school. And she attended American University in Washington, D.C. So that was really my introduction to the District of Columbia and the area. And then that piqued my interest enough that I followed her footsteps, and I went to American as well from 2000 to 2004. Yeah.
When you were young and visiting her, what kind of places was she hanging out and taking you to? Was she taking you to any shows in DC?
No, not so much. My sister's a big music fan, but I think at that point in her life, she was focused on academics, which looking back is just the weirdest thing ever. But I took it upon myself. My parents let me be rather independent, especially if it was in safe places like Tenleytown or Georgetown or something. So I would get dropped off on M Street, and I would go to Smash Records, and I would go to Jinx Proof Tattoo, and I would go to Commander Salamander. There used to be a skate shop on Wisconsin Avenue as well. And so I would just kind of try to take in, on a Sunday or Saturday afternoon in Georgetown, what the local punk rockers would take in. So it wasn't really about trying to get to shows, because I was rarely there, past when the sun went down, but just trying to get a feel of what it was like to be a local in that city that was going record shopping, or that was going to get pierced or tattooed that day, or wanted to buy some funky clothes or some skateboard stuff. So, I kind of gravitated towards the stores and the neighborhoods that had things that were already piquing my interest as somebody interested in those subcultures. But unfortunately, it wasn't really, there weren't a whole lot of instances where I was able to kind of get a taste of a local scene. There were a few times that I went down to Washington for shows, but they weren't local shows. They were huge shows. I saw the Bouncing Souls and H2O at the Capitol Ballroom, I think in 1997. It might have been 98. And that was great. And I met some really cool, local kids, but it wasn't a small local show, it was 2,000 people or whatever, so.
I met some people along the way. Some of them spit, some of them stay. Some of them want some more gone by. Gotta be friends, I love till I die. From all these people I chat to learn. Some of them shine, some of them burn. Some of them rise, some of them fall. For good or bad, I know them all.
But yeah, I think it kind of made me fall in love with the area, and having an excuse to go down to see my sister was kind of a nice coincidence.
Was your experience there different when you were in school there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the formative things about me happened in high school, because I went to a private school in Lancaster that was kind of an artsy fartsy private school and was really small.
Like a Quaker school?
No, it was a country day school, so it was a non-religious. It was just a college prep school essentially, and it was very small. So the pool of people I had to choose from if I wanted to play music with was very, very small. So I had great friends at that school, but none of them were musically minded, oddly enough. So I was playing music with people that were from, the neighboring areas that I just kind of knew from the punk rock scene. And so what happened is I developed two different sets of friends that had surprisingly little crossover. I had my school friends, and then I had my music scene friends. So when I began attending American University in 2000, and I was living in Washington, and it was the first time I was living on my own as a young adult, the same thing happened. I had my friends at AU, and then I kind of reached out and had my friends that were kind of the local scene people. So one night I would go to a party on campus or off campus in the Family-Town area, and the next night I would, be all alone on the train going to the Hammond job in Indiana, Virginia to see the Goons or whoever. And that kind of, set the precedent for what would be the rest of my time in Washington.
And the scene that you came from in high school originally, did you have a high school band or anything back there in Lancaster?
I did. Yeah, the band was called the Statics, and it was the Statics spelled with a K instead of a C, which looking back was just the dumbest thing. But we were a pretty good little punk rock and roll band, and we even toured a little bit, which was back then kind of a crazy notion for a small band from Pennsylvania like ours. But yeah, that was from about 96 to 2000.
In that area, because I imagine there are kids, kind of rebelling against their upbringing or whatever. Is there like a pretty decent punk rock scene there? Does the community support punk rock?
It does and it doesn't. I talk about this with my wife all the time because she's from California and she loves my hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I tried to explain to her and others about the very distinct dynamic between Little Old City, which is a small colonial city of maybe 50,000 people, and the surrounding area, which is incredibly religious and incredibly conservative. So, I should clarify as a disclaimer for any of your audience that we're hoping that, I grew up Amish or grew up with, Amish punk rock, but that didn't happen. That was not at all it. But all the same, I think the rebellion was still there in that, you could join a church group and that was your social life, or you could join and become part of a subculture, whether it be punk rock or hip hop or skateboarding. And a lot of that stuff, the enclaves for that were in Lancaster City. So for as small as it was and for a generally conservative area, as conservative as it was, it was a rather vibrant music community. And not just for punk rock. I mean, there were a handful of somewhat popular, like 90s alternative bands that were from there that had made it really big in the 90s. So,
did you have, did the Statics have a 7-inch or anything like that on consignment or on sale at those record stores you were hanging out in?
Absolutely. We had a a 7-inch. It was the first release called Bombshell Baby, and that came out in '99. And then we had a full length that was only released on CD that came out in 2000, but it was kind of snake bit. It came out right when I left the band to go to college, and the band didn't do a whole lot after that. But yeah, those records, particularly the 7-inch, I think still stand up and are really, really good.
How'd you know how to do it? How'd you know how to put out a record?
That's a good question. I didn't know shit about that. I knew how to play guitar and kind of put some songs together. I think I got to give credit to my friend Tim, who was the singer of the Statics. He was the one who figured out where to get the record pressed and figured out how to print the covers and all that stuff. So, I could probably figure that out today if I had to do it, if I had to put out my own 7-inch. But in 1999, I would have no idea where to start. But I think Tim was just really good at being, inquisitive with people who had done it. So I give him the credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, back then, a lot of teenage bands, at least from our area, they figured out how to maybe record something, and then it went as far as, putting it on tape. It was only the bands that were really industrious that figured out how to press it to a record.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And then most of those records are still somewhat available. It means that the music is still somewhat available, and a lot of people are still listening to and buying vinyl. And I get, people are still buying tapes and everything, but they don't seem to get digitized as often for some reason.
Yeah, and, I'll still kind of, there's a band from the D.C. area that I never saw. I want to say they were called the Rejects or something with a K.
Yeah.
And I remembered it because I think my friend Tad was in that band, but I never saw them. But I just remember they purposely misspelled their name with a K like we did. That's equally stupid. But anyway, my point is, I think if you're in my hometown, you'll see a Rejects record every now and again when you're flipping through the 7-inch. It's just like you'll see one of our records. But the preceding demos that we put out in '96 and '97 that were boombox recordings that we made 10 of, those are long gone, and they're probably in the trash because tapes just don't have the means of having longevity, in my opinion. Whereas, like I said, I give my friend Tim all the credit because him pushing us to do a 7-inch was, I think, really what separated us from a lot of the other local bands who either didn't have the chutzpah to do it or the wherewithal of how to get it done.
Well, you mentioned the Rejects. It seems like the Rejects and the Boyles and, you know, Jarhead and Lickety Split and the Goons. There's a whole bunch of bands, you know, sort of during that time, Positive State, that were all sort of playing around the same places and, you know, were carrying on the torch for that, you know, that DC post-hardcore scene.
Right.
They were playing places like the Asylum and Jenkins Hill and Dharma Coffee House and places like that.
Yeah.
So you were aware of many of those bands when you were playing in the Boyles and crossed over with them?
Yeah, I mean, even before that, because I joined the Boyles in 2001, I actually got the phone call for that the day I moved out of my dorms after my first year of college. So, you know, I was well aware of I mean, the Boyles were one of my favorite bands, just because they played my town a lot, and it was awesome, and their records were great. But the DC bands, really, my intro to it was obviously the Goons, because they would come to Lancaster as well, and there were a few bands that they were always kind of associated with. And then, you know, I think like a lot of people who are very, what's the word? You know, I think a lot of people looked at the Minor Threat and the Bad Brains in that era of DC hardcore and then tried to follow it as those bands broke up and that sound and that scene kind of changed. And by the mid-'90s, and certainly by the late 90s and the 2000s, it was all of this weird, you know, dancey post-hardcore stuff that I think a lot of people like me just could not get into. So, you know, it was a balance of like what your expectations were from Washington's punk scene versus like what was available to you, you know, just as a fan. And you know, people like me that, you know, enjoy the history of this shit. Like, it's not just the bands I like. I like knowing the fertility of the music scene in that area that allowed certain bands to happen. So, but I really would give credit to the Goons for being the band that introduced me to the local scene in Washington. It was all the same. It still is all the same. You know what I mean? Like, you see a band that's like, oh, like what kind of band are you? Oh, we're Bethesda Hardcore. Like, whatever. Just shut up. Don't say that. You know?
Just those two things together makes me laugh. But I guess some people probably think the same thing when they hear Reston Hardcore.
Yeah. Yeah, or Springfield Hardcore. It's like, shut up. Get over yourself. Come on.
But so you played some shows out in Northern Virginia also?
Yeah. Which band are you referring to?
Well, I guess it would. I mean, it could have been either the Boyles or VPR, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, what happened was, so I joined Boyles in the summer of 2001, And we toured a lot across the states. We did a lot of touring that summer and even into that fall. And then even into that winter time, like we were really, really busy. And then in the summer of 2002, I was living in Washington and the Boyles just weren't busy. And I ran into Chris Suspect, somewhere, and he invited me to join him and his friends to play soccer on Saturday afternoons. They called it Bush League soccer, which was just their excuse to just play soccer and drink a lot of beer. And so we were at whatever that elementary school is right on Wisconsin Avenue in Glover Park. And so that's where I met people like Devin and then my future VPR bandmates. And they're like, you know, the grime and the teeth, like they're just the salt of the earth guys. And I really hit it off with them. And Sean had said that he had this band called VPR, who I'd heard of, but I had never seen because, again, all of my free time was spent on the road with, you know, the Boyles, who were based out of Philadelphia. So if I wasn't actually playing shows with them, I was commuting back and forth between Washington and Philly. But Sean said that, you know, they needed a new guitar player. And so I told him I'd be down, and we got together and tried it out, and it fit really, really well, and just kind of went with it. So it was nice to have another band that I could, you know, pour creative input into, and kind of like a fresh group of guys to play shows with and to be involved in the scene in the area in which I live, if that makes sense.
You've taken out, I have to give. You have been gaining, dancing in my soul friend. Back to time, we're far to know. Turn to back, then I lose out of luck. In the past, in times you were around, then I stopped upon you, working on me. You're afraid, but you ran away. Turn to back, turn it back on me.
So yeah, we played a lot of shows in BC. There was a place called the U-Turn at that time on U Street that was really popular. There were a few people who had houses that were doing basement shows at the time. And there was a place called the Royal Lee out in Arlington that was really popular at the time. And yeah, we were just doing everything we could, which was a lot of fun.
You said you joined the Boyles when they already kind of had, you know, a little bit of material together. Did you get a chance to write any songs with that group?
I did, yeah. So I joined the band right when they were about to release their second full length. So they had like countless 7-inches before that and a whole other record. That full length ended up being scrapped and re-recorded, and so I was on the second record, and then I wrote a number of the songs that ended up on the last record. And then after I quit, they went and did some weird kind of hockey-related songs that I didn't really have anything to do with. But yeah, so I was in the band from 2001 to the beginning of 2006. So yeah, there was not a whole lot, surprisingly, that we recorded, because when I joined the band, like I said, they had a whole album ready to go that was already done. But yeah, eventually I did. However, I will say the material that I wrote and recorded with them is not as good as the stuff they did from before I joined, in my personal opinion.
That's pretty humble of you. What was the best song that you wrote of the material you did with the band?
I don't know. There's a song that I wrote because I wasn't writing lyrics then. That was all Greg Boyle. So I wrote a song, and it was called. Greg wrote lyrics for it, and it was called "When the Rats Revolt," and it was great. And then I came into rehearsal one day, and the song was changed to "The Promise," and I thought, oh, okay, like a title's a title, whatever. But the lyrics were totally different, and it was like it was like a love song, but it was still the same guitar riff that I had. So the song is called "The Promise," but it was I think a better incarnation of that song was a previous thing. But there was another song. The bass player and I co-wrote a song called "Blood on the Fields," which I think is probably the best song on that last record we did. Lyrics were all Greg, but the music was Dave and I.
Down from the beaches where the bodies are falling out. Down from the beaches, say, I like with you and me. The thing that winning is the best in the world. One city, one goal. One city, one time to go. One city, one time to go. Oi! One city, one goal. One city, one time to go. One city, one time to go. One city, one goal. One city, one time to go. One city, one time to go. That's my blood on the bleachers. That's my blood on the field. That's my blood on the bleachers. That's my blood on the field. That's my blood on the bleachers. That's my blood on the field. That's my blood on the bleachers. That's my blood on the field.
When the Rats Revolt and Blood on the Field sounds like a great record, right there.
Yeah, I think objectively speaking, I have conversations with my friends about this still to this day, because they were big Boyles fans. That last record that the Boyles did, the last full length anyway, was very good, but it was just a little too all over the place, when it was done. And I think you can probably carve two really interesting records out of it, but we put everything on the same record and just kind of went for it. But so it goes.
Well, it's funny how music, at least popular music now, has seemed to move a lot more towards just releasing songs or shorter, bursts of songs like EPs, and an EP will be, like 3 or 4 songs, and now a full length will often be just like 7 songs or 8 songs tops. It seems like the album format is definitely going away, or at least, in hibernation right now, or even albums are being pushed towards like a shorter and shorter attention span.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's not how I like to listen to music. If I find something I like, I want to dig. And if I dig and I find something else I like, then I want to dig deeper. But, popular music kind of sets those trends for popular music, but I don't think that necessarily translates to underground music, to subculture music, in my opinion. But we'll see. If the next Rancid record comes out and it's 9 songs, then we know that something has gone terribly, terribly wrong.
I'm seeing a lot of releases, even by bands that I really like underground bands that are getting shorter and shorter, which means a lot of the time that they're more focused, and they tend to be rather than like a sprawling kind of all over the place thing that includes a lot of different sounds. It's much more condensed into one kind of sound. You know, the song sets tend to come from one spurt of recording and one spurt of songwriting, which oftentimes when you write like that, you write, you know, like a few songs at a time that are recorded with similar instrumentation in a similar place, you know, with a similar vibe to them.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that it's a challenge for bands that, you know, even in our subculture that are popular, and I'm not trying to paint them into a corner where we should feel sorry for them, but we shouldn't. But, you know, take any band of the last even 9 or 10 years that started doing the full album tours where they play the entire record, you know, whatever record it may be. Typically they're doing that for their most popular record. They know that if they release a new record that's 14 songs, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of effort. It's going to be a lot of money. And they're probably not going to add more than one, maybe two of those songs into their set as they carry on their career. So I think a lot of, you know, kind of the bigger, older, you know, Warped Tour kind of bands, they're not focused so much on a lot of new material or a plethora of stuff to choose from because they know their audiences want to hear the hits. So they're going to give the audience what they want and kind of do what they can releasing new music.
You know, the flip side to that, though, is those tours where they do play those big records. Those big records oftentimes contain a few, you know, little gems here and there that they never did, you know, add to their live set or never wanted to play live or never felt like they were, you know, live songs. So sometimes it's really cool being able to hear, you know, those songs too. Whereas
yeah,
you'd never otherwise hear them in a live setting or hear how the band, you know, performs those songs.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I tend to shy away from those kind of tours. The Bouncing Souls did one, and I can't believe it was this long ago. I think it was 2011, where they would come to a city and they would play for 3 nights, and every night they played 2 of their records all the way through, and that was awesome. That was amazing. Actually, it was for 4 nights. It was 2 records each night for 4 nights, and so that's what I want. If it's a band I really love, I want to hear every song, every record, and like really geek out to it. But you know,
not a lot of bands can do that.
Not a lot of bands can do that. But since that happened, there have been bands that have done it, and I think it's made them better bands. I think it's certainly made them better live bands. Like the Alkaline Trio has done that, Newfound Glory has done that, and you know, I think the bands that look at that and say, I think we can do that, and then they do it, I give them props for that. I think that's cool. And I enjoyed it when they did that. Wes and Jake did it, you know. Yeah, as opposed to just one hit record, you know. Like I'd like to see Rancid do that. There's some old songs that I've never heard them play, but there's new songs that I love that I'll probably never hear them play. But if they play the whole record, they're gonna play it.
Was Rancid a band that you you know, you modeled your guitar playing after, or that helped you learn to play?
A little bit, yeah. They were definitely kind of a punk rock gateway band for me and for all of my friends at the time. You know, once we scratched the surface beyond the Green Day and Offspring level, and we found the Rancids and Bad Religions, you know, it was more of the same in terms of the musicianship was easily approachable for kids like us who were at a very low skill level. And on top of that, the songwriting was great. So that didn't hurt, and it didn't hurt that they looked really cool at the same time. You know, that was definitely a plus. Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, that's more of their like reggae side. Were you were you attracted to that element of their music too?
I liked it. I wasn't attracted to it, if that makes sense. And I can draw that distinction. It wasn't something that I thought, ooh, I'd like to write songs like that. But when I heard it, you know, it was infectious. It was great.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that they're such a, you know, they're such a punk rock staple of, you know, that time. But they were also, you know, heavily influenced by ska and reggae. As some of the best like punk rock bands have been.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they really struck a unique chord, no pun intended, in that they bridged that divide very, very well, without isolating either kind of audience. And I think that was partially why they became so popular, is that they appealed to the punk rockers, they appealed to the ska and reggae kids, and then like their songs are really poetic and really well written. So they appealed to people who like pop music, even though they sounded like they sounded and they looked how they looked back then. I think that's really what kind of made them special, is they were a triple threat in a way that a lot of other bands weren't.
So your music now definitely sounds very different and has taken a very different direction than, you know, that kind of sound of the 90s and the early 2000s. What sort of brought that on?
To be honest with you, I don't really know. There wasn't a specific moment where I decided that I wanted to write a different kind of song or I wanted to do something different. I think my path was strange in that I just played guitar for so long, and I wrote songs on guitar for so long, but I didn't write lyrics really until 2008 or 2009. So it was a different process, I think, for me as a songwriter than it was for most songwriters. And I don't know, by the time I came around writing lyrics, or at least writing lyrics that were good enough to actually sing to people and perform in front of people, it was more of a it had been more of a challenge up to that point, and I got to, I guess, use that time, you know, while I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, to really hone in and figure out what kind of songs I wanted to write. And like I said, because Divided Heaven started primarily as a solo endeavor for me, I didn't want to be the guy with an acoustic guitar, screaming at everybody, and I didn't want to be the guy with the acoustic guitar doing, agnostic front style, madball style breakdowns. I wanted it to be conducive to the instrument and conducive to my voice and how I sounded. So I just kind of started writing songs that were from the heart and hopefully that were in, a proper key that I could sing them in, and just kind of went from there. And the focus was more about songwriters that I liked and trying to learn their tricks than it was about trying to sound like whatever band, I was focused more on, the Paul Westerbergs, or even the simplicity of like Ramones songs or Green Day songs, and try to figure out how I could take lessons from that and do it. So by the time the music was coming out of me that was the Divided Heaven music, it was pure in that it was me. So it wasn't anything else. And I think the main reason why this music sounds so much different than all my other bands is because all those other bands were other people's bands. I was playing a part in their play, so to speak, and Divided Heaven was my band and my stage and my production. And it's just what naturally came.
How does that happen? How do you go from, playing in other people's bands for like a decade to all of a sudden being able to write your own lyrics and sing your own songs? How were you able to find that?
Well, I'll say first and foremost, I didn't do it very well for a long period of time. And there were two things that kind of happened. The first was when I was at American University, I did a semester abroad in Berlin, Germany, and I obviously had to leave both the Boyles and VPR for those 5.5 months because I was living on the other side of the planet. But I took my guitar with me, and I took a 4-track recorder, and I thought, all right, like in my downtime, like I'll write songs for these bands, and I'll come back with demos, and it would be cool. I think the experience was unique, and it was like jumping into the deep end and not knowing if I could swim, because all of a sudden there was like nobody else to distract me and nobody else to make noise with their instruments or nobody else presenting ideas. It was all me, and it was just my ideas, for better or for worse. The stuff that I recorded, I don't think was very good. It was a good lesson in trying to write songs and seeing if I could do it. And it was at that point that I realized, that these bands that I'm in, I love playing these songs and I like writing songs with these guys, but they don't really tap into an emotional level or a deeper level that I would want them to. So how could I make that different? And I didn't know how to do that, but I just kept trying and kept trying and kept trying. And then in 2007, I think, I put the guitar down, and I didn't play guitar for a year and a half. Like I didn't touch the thing. It was just on the stand in the corner of my room. And every time I looked at it, it just made me feel bad, and it made me miss it. And that was another kind of jolt moment where I thought, like, all right, I need to start doing this again. And when I started doing it again, I think the time off was helpful, and it gave me a little bit of it gave me an excuse to be easier on myself in terms of what I was writing. Even if it wasn't good, it was important that I was writing it.
And how had the recording process changed, from the time that you were in Berlin with the 4-track to when you were recording with Bradley?
Well, it was professional. That was the first thing. a 4-track Tascam recorder is a rather archaic piece of equipment. So there's that, obviously. And, it was just, it was different being able to kind of isolate tracks in a unique way. And, to be honest, when it comes to actually recording, I don't really know what I'm doing. I can make some demos that work, but when it comes to actual production and sound isolation and all that other crap, I'm lost. So the biggest jump was to be able to hear the songs how I imagined being able to hear them, as opposed to just a distorted, scratchy demo that I recorded, on a tape.
What was the first one that you did that was like fully realized?
There's a song on the first record called Born Again Non-Believer that I thought was the best written song of the bunch because it was lyrically clever and kind of worked on a couple different levels. It was insulting without, being fuck you, you're terrible. It wasn't that old school kind of VPR approach. And it just had a nice melody to it. And we just did a few simple tricks and kind of made it a little bit more dynamic. And that became kind of the standout track of that recording session. And fortunately, it became the standout track from that record.
What do you say when all's been abandoned and the fire's been left to die? Do you carry on like you've been, or believe the lie? No surrender from the furthest of shores all the way back. This path that chose us, not the path that we chose. What do you say when all's been abandoned and the fire's been left to die? Do you carry on like you've been, or believe the lie? Born again, non-believer, I search for beauty and truth while I shatter the mold. Read my last rites from all the liars and thieves that would kill for my soul.
You said you recorded recently in Belgium.
Yeah.
What was that like? What studio were you recording in? What kind of stuff were you doing there?
It was great. I recorded with this guy, Tim Van Dorm, in Antwerp, and the studio was called Big Dog Recording Studio. And it was a lot of fun. It was nice, no pressure situation. We did 3 songs. They are all solo songs, but very different from one another. I tend to get into this habit of, when working on a new record, writing a lot of songs. And this last time around, I think we determined that it was too much, and it was unnecessary to do so. So I had these 3 songs that were kind of burning a hole in my pocket, and Divided Heaven just put out a new record, this past summer. So we're not in any need or any rush to have new material ready. I just didn't want these songs to sit around and collect dust, and I didn't want to overthink them. So I had the time when I was in Europe to meet up with Tim and do these, so we scheduled it and did it, and now they're great. I think there'll be a really unique release somewhere down the road. I don't know when exactly. And I'm looking forward to the people hearing these songs. And it's nice, and it's kind of a weight lifted off of my shoulders to know that the songs are done they're ready to go, and I don't have to keep them in an era of perpetuity where I don't know what's happening with them. I know they're done, and whatever will be, and I don't have to think about them anymore.
So are you still focused on, like we were talking about before, that, you know, each batch of songs you want it to be a full album? You know, you want those songs to be part of an album? Or, you know, is there ever a time where you're just like, I've got these songs, they're done, they're great, I'm going to put them out?
I think I tend to lean towards the former of what you just described, because when I listen to music, I like listening to albums. And it's been that way since I was a kid. Yeah, I think maybe it's just a generational thing. I'm not really into the EPs. I'm not really into the EPs that we've released as Divided Heaven. I love the songs, but as a release, I can't get into 1 or 2 or 6 songs the same way I can get into 10 or 12 or 13. And so I think I still think like that, but from the business side of being an independent musician in 2019 now, I know I need to change the way that I approach releasing music. So, you know, typically we kind of reserved singles for charity, and we just released in November, we released our second charity single that we had done. The first one was for to benefit Syrian refugees, the Syrian humanitarian crisis. And then we released a new single this past November with all the proceeds going to a local LGBT center here in Hollywood. And so that's, I don't know, for me, singles aren't enough on their own to just kind of exist in terms of interest. So we did it as a charity thing to try to make some money for a good cause. And I think it keeps me more interested knowing that we're doing something good and to help out, and in this case, specifically the local community. But I think that's going to change. Not in terms of us being charitable, excuse me. I think our approach to releasing music is going to change from here on out, because Spotify is kind of the new measuring stick for releasing music, and it's good to have new music consistently flowing into your catalog and into those playlists and into those kind of release radar system and algorithms that they have. So who knows what the future holds, but until there is another Divided Heaven full length, which probably won't be till 2020 or 2021, I imagine we'll have more single releases or EP releases in between.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying. With those songs, you could be putting them out, you know, every 2-3 months, and then I'm sure more will come, and then they could all be collected onto an album later on too.
Yeah, you never know.
It seems that's how a lot of people are doing it, but I always wind up falling back on the album format myself.
Yeah.
Just because, that's what we were raised on.
Yeah, and even if I'm at the gym and I've got Spotify on and it's got shuffle and I'm listening to Body Count, which I do a lot of these days, I like when a song comes on that I don't know, and I like it, and I look and I go, oh, it's on the same record. Oh, okay. There's just a comfort that comes over me when I realize that. And I think it's because of what you and I had mentioned before. It's kind of how we grew up. It took effort to get up out of our chair or off the floor to go and press fast forward through the songs you didn't know to get to the next song that you knew from the radio. It took effort to get up off the floor and to pick up the needle off the record or flip the record over or whatever. Now we can listen to music anytime we want, anywhere we want, and I think it's more enjoyable when you just kind of let the record take you on a ride as opposed to just constantly playing mixtape DJ on your phone.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. Although I wind up playing a lot of mixtape DJ too.
Yeah.
So, what does the future hold for you musically, you think? What are some of the things that you still would like to accomplish?
Well, personally, I just want to keep writing songs. I know a lot of people whose lives changed for the better, some have changed for the worse, and they're in a capacity in which they're unable to write songs because of various reasons. So I hope to continue to write. My goals for this year are to do more co-writes with people and to write songs for the sake of writing songs and increasing, the capacity of my publishing company and to try to make some more money from songwriting, which is kind of the new most competitive field in music. There's less people starting bands. There's less people DJing. Everybody is writing a song that they're trying to get pitched to a Grey's Anatomy episode because that's where the money is. But I enjoy writing in that capacity, and I've had a little bit of luck with it, so I'm going to chase that down and try to do that more in the next couple of years. And then professionally, kind of in a band setting or Divided Heaven or any other bands, I'm kind of open to really anything. Like I said, it's nice to not have to write new music for Divided Heaven. It's nice to be able to kind of coast, if you will, or to continue to tour and really push the material that we released last year. And I love those songs, so I look forward to playing, most of those songs, at least for hopefully the rest of my life. And yeah, so I think I'm in a good spot. I'm feeling good. I love what I'm writing. People are reacting positively to what I'm writing, and it's more than anything I could have ever hoped for, to be honest with you. When I was that college kid in the Boyles and VPR playing punk and hardcore versus now, I think now is a lot more sweeter. At times it's more lonely, but it's a lot sweeter, I think.
How do you think that those experiences in DC and Northern Virginia kind of influenced you or, changed the course of your life?
I had a feeling you were going to ask a question like this, so I actually prepared an answer. And in terms of a songwriter, perhaps not at all. Maybe. I don't know. But I don't think that's as interesting. I think what living in Washington prepared me for was to always be a prepared outsider. I don't want to use the term minority because I am a white, straight male in American culture, so I don't want to paint myself as a minority just because I'm a punk rocker or a hardcore guy. But I think that, Washington is full of a lot of young people and a lot of young professionals, but it's not really, on the surface anyway, at least driven by its subculture. But there is a great subculture there and a great history there. And for me to be a part of it for just a handful of years was really important to me and influenced me to be comfortable as an outsider. So if I'm interning at a news radio station and I'm at the Capitol or I'm at the fucking White House, and I've got an Agnostic Front t-shirt on underneath my suit shirt and my jacket, like that to me feels emboldening, and that's really great. And that's something that I've kind of carried with me as I kind of evolve into more of the pop songwriter world that I've been doing, it's nice to be able, when people are like, oh, play a song that you wrote or whatever, and I play a song like 1983 off the new Divided Heaven record, and everybody else in the room is playing songs that they play or wrote or produced, and it's all pop music. I like being the rock and roll guy that stands out, and I like being the one that people remember because it's authentic and it's me and it's imperfect. So I think that time in Washington prepared me for that. It's like it's not just being different and being comfortable being different. It's about thriving as an outsider in whatever setting you are, whether it's a professional setting or a professional music or professional songwriting setting, and really not conforming into what everybody else is. It's kind of keeping that stripe, that makes you unique.